It's kind of weird because Jake Paul is extremely bigger than Tank, and I mean, but with it being a exhibition, makes sense.
I'm gonna start like this. First of all, if you're a boxer and you're not taking note or notice of what Jake Paul is doing, you're worried about criticizing his boxing skills, then you're the fool.
Jake Paul versus Tank Davis. They just announced the fight. What's your instant reaction to that?
I don't know what's going to happen with a 135 pounder going up against a 200 pounder. I think it's not a real fight. Jake just too big.
The world of boxing is buzzing again, and this time it's a matchup that fans never thought they'd be talking about seriously. Jake Paul versus Gervonta Tank Davis. On one side, you've got the YouTuber turned prize fighter who's been building his career brick by brick, taking on MMA fighters, former champions, and slowly edging toward legitimacy in the boxing world. On the other, you've got Tank Davis, one of the most explosive and feared knockout artists of this generation, a man who has spent his entire...
You know what? Fair play. If he does go out and fight Anthony Joshua, which I wouldn't advise because that would be extremely dangerous, then fair play if he was to do that. And all the critics and people like myself would have to shut the hell up because I always said he's looking for fights that were manufactured, looking for fights that were predetermined. And by that, I don't mean fake fights. I don't mean fixed fights. I mean fights where the odds are so stacked in his favor that, of course, he's going to win. And, of course, we see this. The latest match that's going to go down November 14th at the State Farm Arena in Atlanta, Georgia. Jake Paul is taking on, you've seen it by now, Gervonta Tank Davis. A man that is a lightweight in boxing. Now, lightweight in MMA is 155 pounds. Lightweight in boxing, 135 pounds. Jake Paul, I think when he weighed in for Mike Tyson, was 227 pounds.
Official weight, 227.2 pounds.
That is, if I'm not mistaken, a 92-pound weight difference. Almost a 100-pound weight difference. It's insane. Let's say he comes in at 200 pounds. It's still a 65-pound weight advantage, which is absolutely ridiculous. How can you be out there claiming to want to fight the best people on the planet and then going out there and taking on a guy that is maybe 92 pounds heavier, that is at least 65 pounds heavier than you? That is called one thing. That's called being a bully. It was bad enough when he fought Mike Tyson, a man that was 58 years old, and he was walking around like, oh, I just beat the best man on the planet. I just destroyed Mike Tyson and went out there and I beat him, and him and his brother are all celebrating and shit like that. It's like, dude, what are you doing?
Entire life in the ring, carrying the legacy of Mayweather Promotions and making highlight reels with every devastating punch. The contrast between these two couldn't be sharper, and yet here we are with boxing legends weighing in on how a fight between Jake Paul and Gervonta Davis might play out. When Jake Paul first entered the sport, the boxing establishment rolled its eyes. To many, he was nothing more than a circus act, cashing in on his social media fame. But over time, his work ethic, promotional genius, and willingness to step into the ring against seasoned fighters earned him at least a sliver of respect. Names like Tyron Woodley, Anderson Silva, and even Nate Diaz brought him experience, but critics still ask the same question. What happens when Jake Paul finally steps...
Fans are losing their minds over this Jake Paul versus Tank Davis fight. And honestly, can you blame them? Why would Tank agree to this? I mean, look at the graphic. Jake is 6'1", 199 pounds with a 6'4" wingspan. Tank, 5'5", 133 pounds, a 5'7" wingspan. Tank fighting me would be a fairer matchup. We're basically the same size. And you wonder why fans think Jake's fights are rigged? Because every time we see some nonsense like this, it feels like WWE with boxing gloves. Here's the kicker though. Jake threatened to sue anyone who calls his fights rigged. Yeah, you know, the same guy who preaches freedom of speech now wants to ban opinions. After that clown show with Mike Tyson that left everyone scratching their heads. Maybe, and I'm just throwing it out there, if your own management company wasn't promoting and sponsoring your fights, fans might actually believe what they're watching. Until then, don't be mad that people are skeptical. Be mad that your boxing career looks more like a scripted reality TV.
In against a real, prime boxer. And there's no better example of that than Tank Davis. Mike Tyson, a legend whose words always carry weight, has already given his perspective on Jake Paul's progress. Tyson has said more than once that Jake Paul is good for boxing because he brings eyes to the sport. In fact, Iron Mike has trained alongside Jake, praising his commitment.
He is not the guy that knows how to sell a fight. Tank cannot sell a fight in his own division. You have the Paul brothers and they come over to boxing. Their idea from day one is we don't have the skills or the experience. What we're going to do is we'll take on the absolute best guys, but they're going to spot us some pounds. Tank has one job to do, that it doesn't make any difference, that boxing is a real sport. My skills versus your skill, of which I am an abundance of and of which you have none of. Tank is telling anybody that will listen that there's a size problem. My skills and my experience in boxing, I do not have to wonder who's in the bar tonight. Any bar I go to, I rule the bar. No, it turns out that you don't. Just need some big guy to corner you, apparently. Boxing has never stood its ground. Boxing has never been able to explain why Floyd needed a half hour to get rid of a guy who's never boxed before. Tank Davis has already began this. When you choose a dum-dum, don't be surprised when he goes out and acts like a dum-dum.
And raw power. But when asked about a matchup with Gervonta Davis, Tyson didn't hesitate. He admitted Jake has size and strength, but Davis has something you can't teach: timing, speed, and fight IQ. Tyson believes that unless Jake lands something big early, Davis would pick him apart, closing the distance, slipping shots, and punishing him with combinations. Coming from a knockout king like Tyson, that's high praise for Davis and a sobering reality check for Paul. Floyd Mayweather, who guided Gervonta Davis from a young age, has been protective of his star.
Versus Tank Davis, they just announced the fight. What's your instant reaction to that?
I don't know what's going to happen with a 135-pounder going up against a 200-pounder. I think it's not a real fight. Jake just too big. Tank ain't gonna be able to get in from that jab. Jake land one good punch on Tank, it's over.
Our pupil. Floyd has always emphasized Davis's natural gifts, his ability to see punches before they come, his cat-like reflexes, and his finishing instinct. Mayweather once compared Tank's explosiveness to a prime version of himself, but with more raw power. If you ask Floyd about Jake Paul, you'll hear a mixture of respect for Jake's hustle and skepticism about his ceiling. Floyd knows Jake is a big guy, standing over 6 feet and weighing in around cruiserweight, while Davis is much smaller, usually fighting around lightweight and super lightweight. But Floyd insists that in boxing, skills pay the bills. He has said time and again that Tank Davis could neutralize size with skill, just like Floyd did throughout his career. In Floyd's eyes, the
case here, when you've got what is like a 70-pound difference between these two guys.
I mean, size will play some part of the fight, but if I'm thinking like I'm Tank, I'm probably just gonna go out there and try to outbox him and use my knowledge and IQ against him. So I can see Tank just outboxing him and making it real easy.
Is there any way you could, any realistic or legitimate way in your mind you could see Jake Paul winning a fight against Tank?
No.
No way.
Nope.
Not a lot of people have talked about Jake and said he's got good power. Not even and I get anything could technically happen, but you don't even see a realistic shot where he could land one big punch, and Tank being so much smaller, he just can't handle the power.
Nah, not at all. I think Tank is he's been boxing his whole life. Been boxing since a kid, so I doubt like that's gonna be an issue or problem. I think Jake is good for where he's at, but I think it's just levels.
What do you think about the rumors of Tank and Jake fighting?
Man, Tank disrespectful to the sport if he choose that over fighting with me. I'm the best fighter in the sport. I've been telling him that. And he called cap on it. So if you want to call cap and say I'm not who I say I am, come prove it. I think it's dangerous for him to go back in there and fight Lamont. I think Lamont is a hell of a fighter. I can see that going left. So he better be on his A game.
Matchup would be entertaining for fans, but Davis's experience and precision would overwhelm Jake. Then you've got Bernard Hopkins, the cerebral assassin of the boxing world. Hopkins doesn't look at fights emotionally, he breaks them down strategically. Hopkins points out that Jake Paul's advantages are size, youth, and stamina. But he also highlights Jake's weaknesses: lack of true boxing fundamentals, struggles with footwork, and vulnerability against pressure fighters. For Hopkins, Davis is exactly the kind of fighter who would exploit those flaws. He compares Tank to a shark in the water, patient, circling, waiting for the right moment, and then striking with precision. Hopkins predicts that Paul would have some success in the early rounds if he stays behind his jab.
Swear to God, I was on a plane coming home from Las Vegas. When Luis told me Gervonta Davis is fighting Jake Paul, I said, get the bleep out of here. I said, you're a bleep liar. Jake Paul is fighting Gervonta Tank Davis. There's one problem. He fights at 135 pounds. Gervonta Davis is that much better than Jake Paul at boxing. But Gervonta Davis in his last fight weighed 133.8 pounds. And I'm not over here in the business of just crapping on Jake Paul. I am much more respectful of what he's starting to build as a professional boxer. You're fighting a guy that's better than you. He's just much smaller. But that guy, because he's better than you, what if he wins? Everything Jake Paul has done is wiped completely out. Gervonta Davis loses to Jake Paul. Obviously, it's going to hurt who Gervonta Davis is. But he lost to a guy that's going to be upwards of 70 pounds bigger than him when he steps into the boxing ring. But I will tell you this right now, without a shadow of a doubt. I will watch this. Tank Davis is 30-0-1. You want to talk about Jake Paul fighting a real boxer? That's a real boxer. You can't make this stuff up, man. It's true. They're fighting.
Using his reach, but eventually, Tank's ability to slip inside would turn the tide. Hopkins, never one to sugarcoat, has even gone as far as to say the fight could end brutally if Jake isn't careful. On the other side, George Foreman, the legendary heavyweight and a man who knows all about power punching, has offered a more optimistic take on Jake Paul. Foreman respects anyone willing to step into the ring, and he believes that Jake's size could create real problems for a smaller fighter like Davis. Foreman points out that boxing history is filled with examples where a bigger, less skilled fighter was able to overwhelm a smaller technician simply by imposing size and...
I'm actually very happy for Gervonta and Jake. I really am, man. It's good for the sport in some way, you know?
So a heavyweight versus a lightweight.
Yeah.
You got a fly hit me, yeah. A heavyweight versus a lightweight. How's this going to work?
Hey, they make it work. It's an exhibition for a reason. So, you know, they know what they're doing. And, you know, shout out to Netflix and shout out to both of them, honestly. Like I said, I think a lot of people in the boxing world are kind of upset. I could care less. I think they're going to go out there and make their money. It falls on the number 8 for a reason. They're going to make a lot of money.
Have you got a prediction for that fight?
My prediction? A show. A show.
Well, clearly it's a show, but when you've got a lot of people underestimating Jake Paul once again, but when you've got a heavyweight boxer who knows how to throw punches and knows the basics against a lightweight, it's quite a difference. I mean, have you sparred heavyweights before?
Yeah.
For competitive sparring in the ring?
Yeah, it's not the same. It's not the same, not at all. Definitely got to move. I've actually played around a few times, went through between their legs just to duck around. But yeah, because they're taller, you know. But I think for that competition, that fight, it reminds me a lot like The Big Show, and Floyd Mayweather when they fought in WrestleMania.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And will that end the same way?
Possibly. Maybe some brass knuckles in there too.
Can you see Jake Paul knocking out Gervonta Davis?
It's boxing, man. And if it's a show like this, anything goes, anything happens. You know, we expected Mike Tyson to do something. Didn't go out that way. Jake Paul's training very hard. So, you know, kudos to both guys. I'm not going to critique the
physicality. He doesn't predict Jake would necessarily win, but he cautions against underestimating him. Foreman has even compared Jake's mentality to fighters of the past who came in as underdogs but shocked the world. Roy Jones Jr., one of the most gifted boxers to ever step into the ring, sees things differently. Roy emphasizes speed, rhythm, and angles, and he believes Tank Davis is in a league of his own when it comes to creating openings. Jones acknowledges Jake Paul's improvement, but insists that Jake is still very predictable in the ring. His punches, while heavy, lack the kind of creativity and disguise that makes elite fighters dangerous. Roy predicts that Davis would feast on those openings, countering with explosive shots that Jake wouldn't see coming. In his eyes, this fight wouldn't last long if Tank decided to press the action. Oscar De La Hoya, who has had his own back and forths with Jake Paul in the media, provides another perspective. Oscar respects.
They told us that it was, we were looking at that fight for February of next year, and they always said that there was a chance that Jake would fight in November. I think, wasn't I the one that broke Jake Paul against Gervonta Davis 6 months ago or something? I know that I knew that they'd agree that deal. I didn't know they were about to announce it then, but I did know that they'd agreed that deal previously. So I don't like it, if I'm honest. I mean, I think we need to really differentiate between boxing and an entertainment concept, and that's what that is. It's a freak show. It's entertainment. It's a lightweight fighting a cruiserweight. With, I don't know, is it bigger gloves and certain minutes per round? I don't know what it is, but I understand the market, and I understand this freak show shock kind of the world mentality of people potentially tuning in. Is that a step too far? Maybe. I mean, I hated Jake Paul against Mike Tyson, but it did massive numbers. I hate Jake Paul against Gervonta Davis. It'll probably do massive numbers. So that's when you really have to differentiate yourself between, just because you don't like it doesn't mean it isn't going to do good business. However you want to be involved with it is another kettle of fish. I don't want to be involved with it, but I do respect the fact that it's going to do big numbers. It's just not boxing. And I don't think we should promote it as boxing.
In the meantime, then, Eddie, where does that leave you with Anthony Joshua? Are you exploring other options for the end of this year, or are you still looking at that fight for the beginning?
Yeah, no, we're not interested in the Jake Paul fight right now. After that, I mean, we're not going to wait around till November. Is it November or December, whenever it is?
That's the promotional game Jake brings, knowing firsthand how much selling fights matters. But Oscar also highlights that Davis has fought at the championship level for years, facing hungry young contenders and proving himself time and again. De La Hoya believes that the psychological aspect of this fight would play a huge role. Jake thrives on controlling the narrative, hyping himself up, and sometimes getting into his opponent's heads. But against Davis, De La Hoya argues, that wouldn't work. Tank doesn't play into mental games. He stays calm, focused, and deadly. Oscar predicts that while Jake would win the build-up,
But Jake Paul might be too big for him, or Tank might crack him. You don't know. Like I said, or as an exhibition, we don't know if they throw at each other or not, or we don't know. I don't know. I can't give an opinion because I don't know what's going on.
Do you think it impacts, will it impact Tank's legacy if Jake Paul were to beat him or even knock him out?
Dude, Tank's a 3-division world champion, 4-time 3-division world champion. At the end of it, bro, you can't take anything away from him.
in headlines, Davis would win the fight decisively. Evander Holyfield, known for his warrior spirit, has given his input too. Holyfield admires Jake Paul's courage but believes courage alone isn't enough against a fighter like Gervonta Davis. Holyfield recalls his own experiences fighting smaller men with exceptional skill, like when he fought Dwight Muhammad Qawi early in his career. He says that skill can neutralize size, and Tank Davis has skill in abundance. Holyfield envisions a fight where Jake struggles to land
more to lose because he's the bona fide world champion. I don't care if he's much smaller. I think Jake Paul has sort of plateaued as far as where his boxing is concerned. It's rather low level. Yeah. He's big, he's physical, he's strong, he can hit. So there is that risk. Davis, at lightweight, you're in a moment where it's too physical for you. You can clinch. Against the heavyweight, where you clinching? You ain't getting out of that corner just clinching anymore if you run out of space. You know what I mean? So it's interesting. But Davis, listen, there's a lot of talking points that I'm sure we'll get into when this gets closer to the fight. Davis can still punch at lightweight. Can he drop a heavyweight? There's a lot to gain there, right? If Davis knocks
the answer is yes.
If Davis drops Jake on his ass, as much as Davis is the one with more to lose, it's still a highlight moment.
A visual that will stay forever.
Yeah. But if you get dropped, even if you're smaller, you're still a world champion, multiple weight classes. If you get dropped, what's the look? What's the feel? On the inside, as boxers, me and Chris Algieri, the champ, even you, Jim, you have fight experience, so we know that the risk is a big guy that big hits you. You're probably going down if you're a small guy if he hits you clean. So we know the risk, but how does it look to the public eye who don't understand that? You know what I mean? The public. So there is a lot to lose, though. There's a bit to gain. I wouldn't necessarily have an issue with this had Davis's career arc been one that benefited boxing. Davis was manufactured and put into a position where he's supposed to benefit boxing. And I don't think he has. I think he's hurt boxing. So by giving him this reward, that's my problem. Why are we watching this? Why don't you make him earn his spot that he still hasn't earned, mind you?
And clean shots, and Davis slowly breaks him down until an inevitable stoppage. Sugar Ray Leonard, a man who dazzled the boxing world with his speed and charisma, focuses on the intangibles. Leonard points out that Jake Paul has heart, and sometimes heart can push a fighter to exceed expectations. But he also warns that heart can't replace instinct. Davis, Leonard says, has those instincts that come from decades of training and thousands of rounds sparred. When the lights are brightest, those instincts make the difference. Leonard doesn't completely dismiss Jake's chances, but he leans heavily toward Davis, predicting a knockout somewhere in the middle rounds. Then there's Lennox Lewis, the last undisputed heavyweight champion, who always speaks with a calm authority. Lennox has analyzed Jake Paul's fights and admits he's impressed with the improvement. But he reminds everyone that boxing isn't about how far you've come, it's about how you stack up against the elite. Lennox sees Davis as an elite fighter, a man with world championship pedigree, and he doesn't believe Jake is ready for that level yet. Lennox predicts that Jake could make it interesting for a few rounds, but would eventually succumb to Davis's speed and power. Fans love to bring up the size factor, and it's worth repeating. Jake Paul is naturally much bigger than Gervonta Davis. If this fight were to happen, it would likely take place at a catchweight or with Jake having to drain down. That in itself could change the dynamics. Legends like Foreman and Holyfield stress that weight and size matter, but others like Mayweather and Hopkins remind everyone that skills and experience almost always trump size when the gap is this wide. What makes this conversation fascinating is how boxing's greatest minds see the matchup through different lenses. Some respect Jake's growth and give him a puncher's chance. Others see Davis's pedigree as overwhelming, almost guaranteeing victory. What's universal, though, is the acknowledgement that Jake Paul has forced the boxing world to take him seriously enough to even consider these fantasy matchups. A few years ago, the idea of legends like Tyson, Mayweather, and Leonard even discussing Jake Paul in the same breath as world champions would have been laughable. But now, it's a real debate, and that alone shows how far Jake has come. If the fight were ever made, the buildup would be massive. Jake Paul's promotional machine would clash with Davis's icy, no-nonsense demeanor. Press conferences would go viral, tickets would sell out, and pay-per-view numbers would skyrocket. Fans would tune in not just for the fight itself, but for the spectacle. The storyline of new school versus old school, entertainer versus pure fighter. And when the bell finally rings, all the talk would fade, leaving two men in the ring, one carrying the weight of boxing tradition, and the other carrying the hopes of a new, unconventional generation. In the end, if you listen to the legends, the consensus leans toward Tank Davis. Most see him as too skilled, too explosive, and too experienced for Jake Paul to handle at this stage. But the beauty of boxing is that nothing is guaranteed. One punch can change everything, and Jake Paul has power in his right hand that can't be ignored. That's what keeps fans talking, what keeps debates alive, and what makes this matchup, no matter how unlikely, so intriguing. Because in box,